Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Fierce Fatty podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Wellsby, and in today's episode, we're talking about mental health, PTSD, and EMDR, all their acronyms. So let's get into it.
Perfect.
You're listening to the Fierce Fatty podcast. I'm Victoria Wellsby, TEDx speaker, best-selling author, and fat activist. I have transformed my life from hating my body with desperately low self-esteem to being a courageous and confident fierce fatty who loves every inch of this jelly. Society teaches us living in a fat body is bad, but what if we spent less time, money, and energy on the pursuit of thinness and instead focused on the things that actually matter, like if pineapple on pizza should be outlawed, or if the mullet was the greatest haircut of the 20th century. So, how do you stop negative beliefs about your fat body controlling your life? It's the Fierce Fatty podcast. Let's begin. Okay, so today's episode is going to be pretty heavy, and I wanted to give a trigger warning, not only in the show notes, but before we start, that I'm going to be talking about things like abuse on a minor, rape, starvation, binge eating. I'm going to be mentioning a paedophile. And talking about this all in relation to mental health and post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you're feeling like any of those topics could trigger you, did I say binge eating as well? Binge eating, in case I didn't mention that. So if you're feeling like any of those topics might trigger you, then skip this episode. But if not, then come along and let's talk about this really important topic. So I want to be talking about living with depression. I live with depression and PTSD, and what has actually worked for me to, in so much as you can, overcome this deep shit. And the reason why I wanted to do this episode is because one of my most recent posts on the interwebs, on Instagram, on Facebook, I had a lot of people saying, thank you so much for sharing this. This is exactly how I'm feeling. It's so nice to know that I'm not alone. And this has given me some hope. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to put this into an episode. And I never thought I would be doing an episode like this, because talking about my mental health, I don't want to say issues, my mental health in general, has not been something that I've done. It's something that I've hidden, and not purposefully, I just didn't want to talk about it. And I've realized that, you know, I talk about so many different intimate parts of my life, and this is a big one. Talking about it helps me, and maybe it might help you. So I'm going to share some of my experiences and talk about the different things I did and what has worked, what hasn't worked. And of course, I'm not a therapist. I'm a coach. I'm not a therapist. So what I'm sharing is my story. I'm not giving you medical advice or mental health advice or anything like that. It's all for information purposes only. And if you happen to pick up something that I'm putting down and it's useful to you, then great. But I'm not a doctor, okay? So just a disclaimer there. I like to think of myself as someone who is super, super fortunate and privileged. If you listen to episode 2 and you know anything about my kind of general life story, you might know that I was brought up in the UK, in a city called Peterborough, which is voted worst city in the UK to live. Not all of it is rough, but there's lots of very rough areas. And I was brought up in one of the roughest areas. And we lived next to a traveller site. And we lived in a council estate. And so we lived, and we were very poor. We lived amongst very poor people, and we were very poor, very underprivileged. Probably not the poorest of the poor in the city, but not far from it. So the area we lived in was very dangerous, very, very dangerous. And one of the reasons why it was dangerous is that there were a lot of sexual predators. It felt like a lot. I don't know if that's a reality, but well, you be the judge of that, me telling this story. It felt like there was a lot of sexual predators around. So I can't remember for certain how old I was, but between the age of 7 and 10, I know it was when I was in primary school. There was a local paedophile, and I didn't know that he was doing it to other people. I think he was, but he would come to our house, and my mum would be at work, and I'd come home from school with my little sister, and when I would be out in the garden, he would come and expose himself to me. So I would be out in the garden playing, and he would be standing in the bushes, because our garden kind of went onto bushes, onto a field, so it was more secluded, and just stand there indecently exposing himself. So the first time he did it, immediately I thought, I've been wrong, I've been bad, I've been naughty. And I went and ran to my older sister and didn't tell her, but just said, I really want to do some homework. Like I needed to repent or something for the bad thing that I'd just done. He kept coming back. And actually one day when I was walking with my friend under an underpass, he was stood there. I don't know if it was the same guy, but I presume so. Who knows? He was just stood there exposing himself to me and my friend. And he came back again when I remember playing on my bike in front of my house, and he was just stood there watching me play. And my mum noticed him and said, Victoria, come in. And I hadn't told my mum what was happening until I told a friend. Actually, this is a different friend, and she was like, you need to tell your mum. And I remember she was like a little bit wiser or older or whatever. I remember going in and telling my mum, and my mum being horrified, obviously. And so when she saw this guy exposing himself again, she rushed in and told my brother, my older brother, and my brother chased him and couldn't catch him, which is a shame. Later, a few years later, actually, in the same area, that underpass, someone was raped, and I'm very sure that it was probably the same guy because of escalation of behavior. But I don't know for sure. Anyway, so this experience when I was between the age of 7 to 10 really messed with my head, obviously. And because it happened at home is somewhere where you're meant to be safe. And I wasn't safe. I literally wasn't safe at home. And we were too poor to do anything about it. Like, we couldn't move. We reported it to the police, but, what could the police do, really? Unless they caught him in the act. And I was just terrified to be at home and to walk around the streets where I lived, because he was literally hanging out in the streets, hanging out in the bushes, like in the playgrounds that were there, which were really run down and dangerous anyway. But he'd be hanging out there in the bushes. And any time that I would hear any kind of noise in the bushes, I'd be like, oh my God, it's him. And I'd be terrified and run home. But then at home, I wasn't safe. And so at home, I became very deeply traumatized, so I couldn't be left in a room alone. So I always had to have someone in a room with me. That included going to the toilet, so I couldn't go to the toilet on my own. I had to have my mum come to the toilet with me because I was so terrified. I couldn't walk up the stairs unless there was someone in front of me, or there was, and also someone behind me. I couldn't sleep without the lights on. I couldn't look out the window into the garden because I thought he could see me in the garden. All sorts of stuff. So how this happened, I don't know. I was so lucky. My mum took me to my local doctor and told him about what I was experiencing, and I got to go to therapy for free. I'm just so thankful that that happened, that my mum recognized that she should try and do something, because there'd been lots of mental health issues in the family, and it had not ever been kind of like a solution sought for it. But I think this was like such an extreme case where I couldn't do anything, and I would just be screaming and crying, so terrified. And I went to see a therapist, and we did cognitive behavioral therapy. And so what that was for me was testing myself and pushing myself, trying and do something that was scary, but not that scary. So for example, I remember the first time after therapy, she tasked me to try something. And the first thing that I did was to stand in the living room, just at the doorway of the living room, and my mum stood at the doorway of the kitchen, which was like half a meter away, so I could still see her, and then do that for a minute. I remember writing down how scared I was, 10 out of 10 scared. And I did it for a minute. And then next time we increased it to 2 minutes, and next time 3 minutes. Next time I'd go in the room. Next time I would do this. And every time it would improve. And I began to not be scared anymore. But because I was legitimately not safe, I could never not be 100% not scared, because I needed to be, because I literally was unsafe. And so walking around the neighborhood, not only did you have to worry about, getting, attacked by people in the neighborhood, but also being attacked by, grown pedophiles. So that was my first experience with therapy. And I'm very, very thankful that I experienced that. And what cognitive behavioral therapy really helped me do was, it really helped me throughout the rest of my life, of understanding about fear and how powerful fear is and how unreasonable fear is. It can come from a very reasonable place, but how it makes no sense in your head. If you're scared of something, it doesn't matter if someone's but it's not scary, you're safe. It doesn't matter. I was scared to even flush the toilet. And it didn't matter if, my mum was why? What do you think is going to happen if you flush a toilet? It wasn't rational, right? And how you can really break down fear, anything. So this fear was so debilitating that I would, constantly be terrified. That I could overcome that at such a young age and break it down into small pieces was a real self-esteem builder in regards to being brave in life and trying things and knowing that I could overcome it. And I truly do feel like this about everyone, whatever thing that you might be struggling with, if you break it down into little things and you're kind with yourself and do the easiest amount possible, if you do want to overcome a certain fear, then it is a lot more manageable than someone just, trying to force you to do something, and it becomes even more traumatizing. I know there was times where my younger sister would get frustrated with me. She was really young, and so because she would always have to be the person that would hang around with me, and she, if we had a fight or whatever, she'd be like, I'm going to leave the room. And if she left the room, and I'd just be like, oh my God. And it made it worse, sort of thing. So it's when people are scared to swim, and then someone will come and chuck them in the pool, and be like, that will teach them. And I'm like, no, that will give them trauma. Yeah. So I mentioned before there was mental health issues in my household. My dad was an alcoholic. He suffered from depression and anxiety. So much so, my dad should never have got married or had children. Like, he really should have just been a bachelor. Like, that would have made him happy in life. But I think he was trying to conform and do what he was supposed to do. But really, in an alternate universe, there's a version of my dad out there who never got married and had kids and is happy as Larry. So much so about my dad's anxiety and depression. My mum had 2 kids together, and then my mum got pregnant with me, and the thought of another child, he just couldn't handle. He was just like, absolutely no way, we can't have another child. Now my mum is an Irish Catholic and doesn't believe in, I don't know what she thinks about abortions. I think she's very kind of like touchy on the subject. But at the time, she didn't believe in abortions. And my dad wanted her to get an abortion to get rid of me. And my mum is so soft and meek and mild. And my dad was a bully. So I'm really surprised that she didn't. And so because she said no, he said, if you don't, I will kill myself. And I'm really surprised my mum did this, but she said, no, I'm keeping this baby. And so my dad went ahead and he overdosed on his antidepressant that he was taking at the time. This is the first time my dad ever got an antidepressant. He overdosed on it, and then he wasn't successful, and they just took it away from him. That was the idea around mental health at the time. It was like, well, he overdosed and he's a nuisance, and don't give him any more mental health, don't give him any more medicine, because he's clearly, I don't know. Like, I was talking to my mum about this the other day. Like, what if someone is at this point where they attempt suicide? They need help. And obviously it was an abusive thing for him to do that to my mum, like ultimatum, like get an abortion or I will die. So that totally wasn't cool. And when I found out about that he did this, obviously made me feel like a big bag of shit. Now I have a different perspective of like, oh man, he was dealing with some really difficult mental health stuff. And this is the only way that he could see to solve the problem. So I have that in my family. My dad had deep anxiety, unable to go shopping in stores because if there was too many people, it would make him too anxious and he would storm off. At the time, I didn't interpret this as anxiety. At the time, I was just like, oh, he's such a dick. He's such a mean person. He died a couple of years ago, and reflecting with my auntie, we were like, do you know what? I think that he was autistic as well as having anxiety. He wasn't able to relate with people. He was lots of signs of being somewhere on the autistic spectrum, which is a shame that we didn't recognize that while he was alive, because it makes so much sense. But when you're a kid, or when you're in someone's life, sometimes it takes a step back to realize, they're not just a dick. They've got something else going on. It's about their brain and stuff. I remember writing in my diary. I had a diary. I still have a diary. I had a diary from the age of 10 or 11. It is fucking hilarious. There's so much shit in there. But like, oh my God, I can't believe Rachel said that. And then Irene did this. And then, oh my God, she's such a bitch. All this sort of bullshit. And there's also really sad things in there. I remember clearly. I don't have my diary with me because I'm in Ireland at the moment. It's in Vancouver. But I remember clearly writing a line in there saying, I will definitely suffer from depression as an adult. There's no way that I can't, from all of the shit that's happening as a child, which was quite insightful. Now I think that I was already depressed as a child. I often couldn't go to school because I was too anxious to do it because of different pressures. Like I'd I would play the trumpet and I couldn't handle going to my music lesson and things like that. But it wasn't treated like there's something wrong with maybe something, Victoria's mental health might need to be looked at. It was more kind of like she's lazy. And that's what I felt was, I'm lazy because I don't want to do that. As well, in regards to my mental health, then I was binge eating and also restricting, hence why binge eating, because I lived in a very kind of anti-fat and diet positive household. And so there was a lot of body image issues and self-esteem issues going on there. So I was also doing that. So who knows why I, as an adult, currently, I don't know if I will always have depression. I don't know if it works like that. If you're always just a depressed person who manages their depression. I don't know what the answer to that is. But I think it's a combination of the genes from my dad. His mental health was, an area that he should have been able to focus on, but the times, meant that he couldn't. Or maybe it was the stuff that happened in my life, kind of difficult childhood and all that type of stuff that made it more difficult for my mental health. Who knows, right? But that's just who I am. So by the time I was 17, I met a 30-year-old guy, creepy as fuck. And of course, at this stage, I had very low self-esteem, being a fat teenager, coming from a place where at the time I was homeless, difficult childhood, alcoholic dad, all sorts of stuff. So I was just prime pickings for a creepy older guy who went on to abuse me. So because of my low self-worth and because I'd never seen a healthy relationship in real life, like my dad was, I mentioned, domineering. My mum was the doormat. It was kind of, in my mind, maybe that was my role too, to be a doormat, to be agreeable. And of course, I basically was dating the my dad, which is just so cliched. But this guy was even worse than my dad, because this guy was actually deeply abusive. So I spent 2 years with this guy, and where my mental health was at that time, maybe, I was struggling with my mental health and things was tough and I had really low self-esteem. But he took that and being with him plunged that into the darkest depths that I had never experienced, where I longed to go back to that dysfunctional household with the alcoholic father and all that sort of jazz. To begin with, he was so charming, and now if there was a 17-year-old girl who told me this story about how she met this guy in the club, and the guy, for starters, I met him in this club where like loads of children were hanging around, literally, I was 17 in the club. You go to the club, it's legal in age 18 in the UK, so it doesn't seem as bad as it is, but he was 30 and hanging around where all these 17-year-olds were. And he came up to me, and instead of saying, "Oh, can I buy you a drink?" he was like, "Can I buy you a lollipop?" Oh my God. Hello, red flag. He really liked treating me like a very young child. So it's so fucked up. He would always buy me teddy bears, and he would want me to take teddy bears out with me. Say if we went out anywhere, he'd put loads of teddy bears in my bag for me. He wanted me to dress like a schoolgirl. He would want my hair in pigtails. He basically wanted a child. And he would always be like, "Oh, you're so old. You're so old." "Oh, you're 17. And then when I turned 18, he was just like, "Oh, God," oh my God. Now I'm just like, what the fuck? And that's just the beginning of it. He started controlling me, very emotionally abusive. He began to be physically abusive, but in ways where I excused it, like, oh yeah, but he might have hit me, but we were falling asleep, and maybe I knocked him or something, and that's why he punched me in the head. I would make excuses for it. And because it was sporadic, it was never like, oh, well, he beat me up. It was always like, well, I just make excuses. Something that he did, which really, really, really fucked with me, because I was very vulnerable around this as well, was food. He put me on a diet. I say diet. What he did was he starved me. He decided what I was allowed to eat, and it was hardly anything. Did not meet any of the food groups. Like, if I had carried on with this diet that he'd given me, I would have died from malnutrition, because it was just bread and processed cheese and a tin of spaghetti hoops. So, and if I deviated from this plan that he had for me, I would be in big trouble. Now, as we know, if you restrict, then your body will rebel and will make you focus on food because you need it. You need it to survive. And imagine that I was restricting myself because I thought this was a good thing. It was very kind that he was helping me lose weight because I was so fat and disgusting. So he was being very charitable to help me lose weight in this way. So I had him controlling me, and I had myself controlling me. And my poor body was just like, feed me, oh my God. And so then whenever I did have chances, say when he went to work, or I went around to see a friend, or spent some time with family or whatever, I would deviate from this plan, and I would feel terrible about it. I'd feel terrible that I had eaten food, and I would think, oh my God, I'm so greedy because I had a slice of pizza or something. And oh man, he would do things like on the weekend, he would order himself pizza and fries and salad, and he would sit there and eat that, and I would be there just salivating. He would absolutely not let me have any at all. Maybe sometimes, and it would be like, oh, you can only have the tiniest amount. And he would save it, and the next day he would have the leftovers. And if he ever caught that I had any of his leftovers, he would literally count how many of whatever it is takeaway he'd have, how many he had of this, and he would remember. And so if I had snuck and ate a chip, he'd be like, there's something, you had a chip, didn't you? You did, didn't you? You're so greedy. On top of this, he was also an alcoholic. And so the times when he would pass out from drink that's when I might try and sneak food and hope that he would forget because he was drunk, and think, oh, maybe he ate it, and I'd get away with it that way. And I remember one morning waking up, he had passed out the night before, with him storming into the room because he'd passed out in the living room and hadn't come to bed, holding up a bag, the takeaway bag, and he was like, you ate a chicken ball, didn't you? And I was just, he burst in, woke me up, and I was just like, what? No, I didn't. And he was just like, you're so greedy. You're just so disgusting. You can't even help yourself. And I think I was just like, yeah, I eventually had to admit it to him because he was like, I counted them and stuff. But it was just so head fucking uppy, to put it lightly. On top of this, he also raped me. One evening he got drunk, and he would want me to be drunk too, but I wasn't really a big drinker. I was always wary of being a big drinker because of my dad being an alcoholic, and he was trying to force me to get drunk. And he passed out, and then I went to bed thinking, oh God, I've escaped him, force feeding me alcohol. But then he came into the bedroom and raped me. Now, at the time, I didn't know that that was rape. Like, I just thought, I just have to put up with this. I just have to, you know, at least he's not shouting at me, you know, at least he's not throwing things or threatening me. Like, this was like in my mind, a lower level of abuse. And so it was a more favorable outcome than him force drink feeding me wine. Right. And it was only years later, and I, you know, looking back and being like, oh yeah, that was abuse. Oh yeah, that was this. No, yeah, that was not okay. I knew that I didn't like it, right? Or everything that he was doing, I knew it didn't make me feel good. I knew I was afraid of him. I knew that he was an alcoholic, and I knew that that was not a good thing. Like, I knew, but my slow self-esteem didn't allow me to say, I'm out of here. And of course, it's very dangerous to leave abusive relationships anyway. So this is where I got the bulk of my trauma from. The bulk of my PTSD came from this 2-year relationship. Eventually, I got a job working in a bar. I started making more friends. I became more independent. Friends that he didn't know of, and because the bar was very transient and things like that. And so I was able to make friends with people he didn't know of. He didn't know where they lived. He didn't know their telephone number. And one of the friends there helped me escape. The bouncers from the bar that I worked at came round with me one day, a day that I knew he was out, and we collected a few of my things. One of the bouncers, this will maybe make you feel happy. One of the bouncers, after we left, he was like, oh, I went and did a big poo in his toilet. And I was like, oh my God, that's so awful. And one thing is because, this ex-boyfriend wouldn't let me go to the toilet. He wouldn't let me poo. Which is so fucked up. And so I had to wait for him to leave the house if I ever needed to go to the toilet. I was allowed to wee, but not poo. And if he ever caught me using the toilet to do a poo, he'd just berate me and be like, you're so disgusting. I can't believe you do that. Anyway, and so this bouncer did a poo in the toilet, left the poo there, and rubbed his toothbrush on the poo. And I was just like, oh my God, he's going to think that that's my poo. And I was like really embarrassed. But now I'm just like, fuck yeah, like leave the poo. Yeah, so of course he didn't stop there, and he harassed me. He threw a brick through my sister's window, blah, blah, blah. I went to court and got a restraining order. That didn't stop him. He came to my place of work, punched my boss, stalked my sister's boyfriend, and eventually I left the city because it wasn't safe. But can you imagine then, after that experience, where my mental health was, where I was around food? I was so confused about food and so messed up around food because him putting me on this quote unquote diet, starving me, I thought was a good thing because I was so out of control. I couldn't control myself. Whenever he left, I went and I bought food, and I ate food when he wasn't there. And all I thought about was food. As soon as I woke up in the morning, I remember my eyes opening. I just remember thinking, yes, I get to eat my breakfast, which was a tiny breakfast. And then it would be counting down until I'm allowed to have my lunch. And so I was like, oh my God, I need to go to like Overeaters Anonymous and like Googling that. And instead I went and did Weight Watchers, which just taught me even more how to be disordered around food. Like literally they're teaching you, tips and tricks on how to improve your eating disorder, right? So that was fun. I didn't have any support for my mental health around this time. But something fortunate happened. And that fortunate thing was when I was about 21, I was riding my bicycle and I got to a roundabout, and a woman behind me in a car ran me over. And I wasn't injured that badly. I like hurt my elbow and I was like bruised all over. But because of that, I was scared to ride my bike. And the insurance company does a thing where they send you to the doctor and then you tell the doctor what's going on with you. And I mentioned, I'm scared to ride my bike. And I just thought that was that. I was never going to ride my bike again. And the doctor said, okay, we'll send you to therapy. And I thought, whatever. And the therapy that we did was something called EMDR. Now, what EMDR stands for, there's a word here that I really struggle to say, eye movement desensitization. I literally have it spelled out phonetically. Desensitization and reprocessing. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I've cracked it. I can say that word now. And I was so fortunate to discover this. So I had experienced this minor trauma of being hit by a car. Well, it is a big trauma, but in my life, that was like a drop in the ocean compared to everything that I'd experienced up until that point. And so I went to this therapist and he said, we're going to try this thing, EMDR. And I was like, sounds fucking nuts to me. But I thought, I don't care. I'm not paying for this therapy. We've got 10 sessions of therapy, do whatever. And so what he did, and I'll explain more about what EMDR is I didn't know at the time. It's actually very legitimate form of therapy. It's not some quack medicine or whatever, but it looked like that to me when I walked in. And he had a row of LED lights on this stand, and he had he'd put pulses in your hand, and you would wear headphones, and in the headphones it would be like a beep from one side of the ear to a beep to the other side, and the lights would go left, right, and you'd be watching them, and the pulse would be left, right. And what this is doing is it is processing the trauma that you are currently experiencing. So trauma it's something that we think is a current threat. Right. So most of our experiences in life, we don't remember them because they're not eventful. So the really good things that happened and the really bad things that happened, they stand out. We remember them because they were a big positive emotion or a big negative emotion. And when we have trauma, we think that we still have a current threat. And so we can't let it go because it's not safe for us to let it go if we are still under this current threat that our brain thinks we are. And so, when you're falling asleep and you experience REM, rapid eye movement, your eyes are flickering left and right. That is a time where your brain is processing as what, thoughts and feelings, what's happened in the day. And I like to explain it like, your brain is categorizing things as a memory or things as something they want to remember or a trauma. And so like your memory of brushing your teeth that morning, that can just go into the library in one side of your brain. And on the other side of your brain is where all the scary and happy stuff goes. The stuff that you want to remember or maybe, don't want to remember. But it's important to remember things like trauma to keep you safe. And so REM, what EMDR does is it kind of moves your eyes left to right, and it's doing that processing that REM does, but it's guided by a therapist who helps you understand that trauma and helps you process it to get it to a point where it is no longer traumatic. So it's taking it out from that one side of the brain where it says, this is trauma, and it puts it into the other side where it says, this is just a memory and it's no longer a current threat. And it's fucking magical. Let me read you this definition from EMDR.com about EMDR, so I'll give you a little bit more information. So EMDR is a psychotherapy that enables people to heal from the symptoms and emotional distress that are the result of disturbing life experiences. Repeated studies show that by using EMDR therapy, people can experience the benefits of psychotherapy that once took years to make a difference. It is widely assumed that several emotional pain Severe emotional pain requires a long time to heal. EMDR therapy shows that the mind can in fact heal from psychological trauma much as the body recovers from physical trauma. When you cut your hand, your body works to close the wound. If a foreign object or repeated injury irritates the wound, it festers and causes pain. Once the block is removed, healing resumes. EMDR therapy demonstrates that a similar sequence of events occurs with mental processes. The brain's information processing system naturally moves toward mental health. If the system is blocked or imbalanced by the impact of a disturbing event, the emotional wound festers and can cause intense suffering. Once the block is removed, healing resumes. Using the detailed protocols and procedures learned in EMDR, therapy training sessions, clinicians help clients activate their natural healing processes. More than 30 positive controlled outcome studies have been done on EMDR therapy. Some of the studies show that 84 to 90% of single trauma victims no longer have post-traumatic stress disorder after only 3 90-minute sessions. Another study funded by HMO Kaiser Permanente, found that 100% of the single trauma victims and 70% of multiple trauma victims no longer were diagnosed with PTSD after only 6 50-minute sessions. In another study, 77% of combat veterans were free of PTSD in 12 sessions. There has been so much research on EMDR therapy that is now recognized as an effective form of treatment for trauma and other disturbing experiences by organizations such as the American Psychiatric Association, the World Health Organization, and the Department of Defense. EMDR therapy involves attention to 3 time periods: the past, the present, and the future. Focus is given to past disturbing memories and related events. Also, it is given to current situations that cause distress and to developing the skills and attitudes needed for positive future actions. With EMDR therapy, these items are addressed using an 8-phase treatment approach. So that is from EMDR.com. And what that actually looks like in layman's terms is sitting with the therapist and with the beeps or the pulses or the lights or whatever the therapist uses, it can just be touching your knee with their fingers left to right. There's lots of different methods. They will say, okay, let's think about, there'll be preparation before this. So you're not just, let's think about the traumatic experience. It's you're in a safer environment. And then they'll walk you through that experience and they'll talk about it. And your eyes will start flickering. It's the strangest thing. So you're there. If your eyes are closed, they'll just start flickering, like you're in REM, and you almost feel like you're in a dream state. It's the most bizarre, wonderful, magical thing ever. And within about 3 sessions, I was no longer afraid to ride my bike. I was riding my bike on big roundabouts, riding around, happy as Larry. And so he was like, well, we've got more sessions. What else do you want to work on? And I was like, well, I don't know. I get car sick. And so we did being car sick. It was magical. And that was like a small trauma. So it worked really well, really quickly. And we just kind of did bullshit stuff for the following 10 sessions. I can't remember what we did. But I was like, what is this stuff? And it stuck with me. I didn't at the time, I don't know why, but I didn't at the time think, why don't we use this to talk about the other stuff? I could not at that time. I remember that therapist was like, tell me about your family. And he just said, okay, what about your dad? And I just started crying. And he's like, why are you crying? And I was just like, I couldn't even say. And he's like, is it because you love your dad? And I was like, yeah. I couldn't even talk about my dad, never mind all of the other stuff that I'd been through. So I wasn't at that stage yet to talk about it. So I moved to Canada, and luckily Canada is more of a everyone has a therapist, and people are more likely to talk about therapy than in the UK, where it still is very much more stigmatized, and the idea that there's something wrong, you're defective if you go to therapy, or something like that. So after I'd been in Canada for a few years, I started going to talk therapy, so CBD, cognitive behavioral therapy, and it was okay, but it wasn't getting to what I really wanted to get to. And what I really wanted to get to was getting rid of the nightmares that I had every single night. I wanted to get rid of, if someone said my name too loud, or if someone touched my elbow, or if someone walked by me, or someone sneezed, I would jump 10 feet in the air and be like, oh my God, and scream, and always on edge. And if my boyfriend at the time turned in bed, I'd be like, oh my God. And my low self-esteem and all that type of stuff. And after a couple of years of talk therapy, I was like, it's not going away. And it came back to me that I'd done this EMDR stuff. And my GP at the time was like, oh, it sounds like you need EMDR. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, EMDR. I hadn't taken it seriously. I was like, oh, it's just for this, this little thing, and for travel sickness. It's not actually for heavy stuff. And how wrong was I? And so I luckily found my therapist, who is still my current therapist, and she was specialized in everything that I was looking for, and it was also a feminist therapist. And I was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And we did EMDR for maybe a year, maybe doing 2 sessions a month. And it was just incredible. I cannot even tell you, honestly. I'd go into a session and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm having this nightmare. Every night I'm having this nightmare, the same thing or whatever. And then we do a little bit of EMDR, and she would tap on my knees, and so she'd tap on my knees, and my eye would start flickering, and she'd be like, just notice, and how do you feel about yourself, on a scale of 1 to 10, how true do you believe it is that you are worthless, and whatever it is that I was feeling at the time. And within 1 session, 2 sessions, that particular belief or thought, it was like, no, I don't believe that anymore. I think that I'm great, or I think that I'm, I did the best in that situation, or I think that I was, it's not my fault that I was abused, or whatever it was. And it was just revolutionary. It was really, really life-changing. And we processed all of the trauma. Now, I still go to her, because I think that I always will need a therapist. I think everyone needs to have a therapist. Honestly, it's like saying, I don't ever want to go to the doctor again. It's like, well, you've got a body, so, you need to look after it, sort of thing, if you want it to be in the best health. And I have a brain, that has depression. And so I look after my mental health as much as I can. And so I see her every maybe 3 weeks, every 4 weeks, every 2 weeks, depending on what's going on in my life at the time. And so now we just chat, right? We just, just kind of standard type therapy, and it's perfect. And if I ever did experience anything traumatic, or any of the traumatic things come up again, I will definitely do EMDR again. It's just absolutely incredible. It's literally, I've said this word, magic. It feels like magic, because if you have trauma, the amount of things that you're ruminating on, the trigger responses that you have, you can't help it. And people are like, relax. And you're just like, I would love to, I would love to not be scared when my boyfriend turns in bed. I'd love to not scream in the office when someone sneezes. It's embarrassing. I would love to sleep through the night and not have a nightmare. And you want that, you want to cure that, but talk therapy for me wasn't fixing it, because it was something deeper. So it might work for you. Obviously everyone is different, but that was my experience, that it was incredible. So even though I don't know if you say like my PTSD is solved or it's done, I never have PTSD symptoms again. I don't know. But I know that it's kind of like it's an ongoing thing, right? Your mental health is an ongoing thing, and my mental health is an ongoing thing. And I really, really, try to stay on top of it. Now, the post that I mentioned earlier that people were responding to is, I shared something which was very difficult for me to share. And that was that, so, I did the show, the BBC show, Who Are You Calling Fat? So when I saw the show before it was released, it was edited in a certain way. Now, they hadn't finished the edits, but basically it was going to stay the same as it was. I asked them to take a couple of things out, and they said they were going to add a couple of other things to make me look more likable, because they'd made me look like the villain. And then when they showed it on TV, they'd added in a couple of more things that made me look more, I don't know, unreasonable or unkind, or just not likable. 2.4 million people saw those 2 episodes, and that was just the night. So now it's probably 3 million plus who's watched it on the replay. And I got so many messages. Now, a lot of them were wonderful. They were really nice, saying thank you, you were amazing, you were great, you were the best thing on the show, la 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 la. But a massive portion, which was what was expected, were like, we hate you, you should die, you're a piece of shit, you're killing people. And what I really struggled with was, it's not fine for people to hate me because I'm fat. That's not fine. But I was kind of like, I'm expecting that. But my views were not represented in the show in a way which was accurate. And so they would take sound bites, and it would sound like, it would sound like, I think that fat people never get diabetes. And I didn't say that in the show, but it would come across as like that. And so then people are like, she's fucking dangerous. This woman is encouraging people to get diabetes. And they were like, well, that's not that's not what I think. Or there was a line that they had, I don't believe in health. They used to snip it. I don't believe in health. Health is a social construct. Now, you don't hear the things that I said before and after, which was that I don't believe in the way that we view health as a society, where it's a binary, where either you're healthy or unhealthy, because health is shades of grey. Of course, health is a thing. But then, I've got people being like, ah! And it was non-stop. And of course, I took myself off social media. I had my sister going through my messages and deleting them all, and deleting all the horrible comments. But the trolls would, they would get really creative, and they would find ways to get in touch with me where they knew that I would see it. And so even though I was avoiding it as much as humanly possible, I was still getting bombarded with these messages about how you are a piece of shit. Now, this all coincided with other difficult things that happened in my life in 2019. 2019 was a really shit year for me. So many things didn't go my way. Now, I am a really resilient person because of all of this stuff I've done in therapy, years of therapy. I have learned to bounce back from things not going my way really easily. Like people would describe me as very positive, very happy and all that type of stuff. But 2019 wore me the fuck down. And so then when the show came out after a year of things not going my way, and I had, all of these people telling me that I am such a bad person, that I have a bad personality, that I'm a bitch, that I'm hurting children and all sorts of stuff, which is not true. But I started to believe it. And I started to internalize those messages. And I started to withdraw from my support network. And because I thought, oh my God, I must be so embarrassing for them. I've made a fool of myself on TV. I didn't make a fool of myself, but this is how I was interpreting it. I've let down the fat positive community. I've made a laughing stock of the fat positive community. I think I know stuff and I don't, and I'm actually a very mean and cruel person. And I started just to believe all this, like these waves of messages just had infected my brain. And the thing is, trolls are really smart, so they'll try and come after every different thing at every different angle. So it wouldn't just be like, one thing. It'd be, oh, your hair is shit, and then someone else would be like, oh my God, you've not even got that many followers on Instagram or whatever, and someone else would be saying something like, oh, your dad would be so ashamed of you, and like things like that. And it just got in, and there was like a little crack in my brain because of the shitty year, and they just got into my brain. And the result of that was me becoming suicidal and genuinely believing that I should die, and thinking that I was a burden on my family, thinking that I was just an embarrassment, thinking that no one really cared about me, or, I was just a nuisance sort of thing. And thank God, because of all of the work that I've done and the access I have to my therapist, talking to my therapist after a couple of sessions, she kind of snapped me out of it, and I went back to all of the self-care that I am used to doing, and I was able to overcome that really quickly. Obviously, I'm still slowly overcoming that. Like I didn't work for all of December and half of November. I still did the podcast because I wanted to, but I didn't work at all because I needed to protect myself. And luckily, because I have my own business, I could do that and not have too many questions being asked. I took myself off social media. I shut down my Twitter so people couldn't follow me or whatever. So yeah. So just to say that this stuff is hard, right? You can work years and years and years at your mental health, and you can have a shit month or a shit week, a shit day, some shit circumstances happening, and it could tumble down. Luckily, because I've worked so hard at this, it was kind of like a stumble. It was like a wobble. But that wobble could have had a very, very serious consequences. And of course, it's serious anyway to think that I shouldn't be on the planet anymore. But it's fucking hard out there, right? It's hard out there, y'all. Woo! So I shared that on social media. And the reason why I wanted to share that is because I haven't often talked about my mental health and what is going on with me. I kept it very private. I would never tell colleagues. Like any time that I was dealing with mental health issues, I would never take time off work, or I would try not to. I would never complain. I would never ask for the support that I actually needed. And that wasn't real, that's not real. Like, you might see Victoria as this very confident, positive, bubbly person, and I am all of those things, but also I'm fighting something else. Day to day, I'm very happy, but I have to work at it. And I am positive, and also I can have days where I don't feel positive and I feel negative, and that's the real Victoria. So I wanted to share that with you and share the work that has gone behind overcoming my PTSD and working at my depression. And as well, I have medications to help with my depression. And thanks Canada, because Canada really helped get me to a place where I could think about going to a therapist and taking medicine and feel less stigmatized, so it feel less ashamed, but still did feel very ashamed, because I wanted people to think that I had all of my shit together, that I had I had a shitty past, but my future is absolutely 100% rosy. And I don't think anyone's life is 100% rosy, right? I think that everyone struggles with feeling bad and feeling shit, and maybe people don't get to the point where they think that suicide is a potential option, but I'm sure a lot of people can imagine getting that, to that place. So yeah, I've been vulnerable in today's episode, and even chatting now about this. Before I started recording, I was saying to myself, oh, maybe you shouldn't do this episode because people are going to think that there's something wrong with you, and that you are not professional, and you are not, I don't know, you don't have it together, and that you're just, my brain was telling me stupid stuff. And I was like, no, that is due to the stigma around mental health, that you are believing those things, Victoria. It is not true. It might be true. Some people might be thinking, oh God, I hate her now. Now that I found out that she sometimes struggles with her mental health, I hate her. Well, they're not the people that I want being a member of the fierce fatty community, right? So if you're struggling, then I feel you. I hope that you have a network around you, even if it is, honestly, if you think that it's not valid, if your network is online, it is absolutely valid. And a lot of the times, people who live in marginalized bodies, that is a place where they seek refuge. And so I did get a lot of refuge from people online, and friends that I've met online, who some of them are now I've met in person, because some of them live locally and some of them not. It has been invaluable just to have someone to say, hey, I've got your back, or I hear you, or whatever. Know that there are many people out there who support you, who want you to feel good, who think that the world is a better place because you're in it, right? So yeah, that's what I'm saying about that. So a fact about me, because we're ending the episode, so I want to give you a little fact about me. I'm going to have to give you a picture for this so you can see it. But my fact about me today is that I have a wonky index finger. So, when as a kid you suck your thumb? Well, I used to suck my left index finger and then rub ribbon on my lip. And this means that my finger kind of has turned, and so it doesn't go downwards. And so when I use my index finger and middle finger, if you do your index finger and middle finger, put them together and touch your thumb with both of them together, you can do that, right? So if I try that on my left hand, my two fingers just split and I can't touch my thumb with my index finger. And so it means that my left index finger is like a useless finger. I can't use it to do things. So like if you're doing a button or using a knife and fork or typing on the keyboard, my finger is always up in the air because it's basically, I can't use it to do anything. So it's just hanging around, floating around in the air. I'll put a picture up on the show notes. Also in the show notes, which is fiercefatty.com/015 for episode 15, I'll put in a link to EMDR.com so you can look more into EMDR if you want. Of course, you don't have to, but it's there for you. And also, if you are feeling suicidal, please reach out to someone, whether that be just Googling your local hotline that you can call, or telling a friend, or telling someone on the internet. You don't have to be alone. So please do that. And I'll put some links in the show notes too, for you to reach out to get some support if you need it. Oh, it's been a heavy one today, hasn't it? Thanks for being with me. And if you enjoyed this episode and you got something from it, please leave a 5-star review for me on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts, whatever you're listening to. And if you would like a free copy of my book as a thank you, take a screenshot before you submit it and send that to victoria@fiercefatty.com, and I will send you an audio and digital version of my best-selling book, Fierce Fatty. And share on social that you are listening, and tag me, and I will put you in a draw to win a Fierce Fatty cup. So yes, thank you for hanging out with me today, and I will see you Fierce Fatties next time.